Well, some of you have perhaps heard me talk about methodology quite passionately before, and some of you have heard me arguing madly about, what we do in the classroom. I started doing this talk at the beginning, thinking that I would really like to have a go at all the things that we are not doing right in the classroom. I thought about all the theories that we knew about applied linguistics, about the theories of second language acquisition, and how we're not applying them in the classroom or applying them wrongly in the classroom. As I started to do that, I started to realize that it was not just the bad things that we were doing wrong, the things that we were doing wrong in the classroom, but also the things that we were doing right in the classroom. Um, as I started to explore this and I started to take that trip down the memory lane of methodology, it started to remind me of all the debates we've had and all the pros and cons of each method. So today I thought I would just take you down that trip, that little trip with me, and remind you of all the little approaches in teaching that has existed since the beginning of time. Now, first of all, let's have a think about the academic studies of applied linguistics. Now, we know a lot today about language learning. We discuss it at conferences, we talk about it, but and we provoke a lot of thought, but how much of what we do is really being applied in our everyday classroom? This is said by a very wise person, Penny and it has been said that teachers who have been teaching for 20 years may be divided into two categories. Those with 20 years experience and those with 1 year's experience repeated 20 times. I love this quote. It makes me feel that teachers would think about what we do and try and justify what we do instead of continuously doing the same thing again and again without actually judiciously picking and thinking through how we got there in the first place. So to think about how we got there in the first place, what better way to do so than to go back in time to the first recorded instances of language learning. Now, these are Gregorian monks you see there in the cartoons, and they clearly needed Latin to chant, to understand scriptures, to write religious texts. And there was a lot of rote learning going on, a lot of I am, you are, he is, she is, it is, we are, etc. The underlying belief was that if you repeated something enough, you'd soon learn it. The Chinese scholars of the old days used to do the same thing with poetry. They spent most of their time committed to memorizing classical poetry to memory, committing classical poetry to memory by rote learning itself. Soon after, you had this. This was another favored, or what is often considered the traditional way of teaching. If yes, Chris, I hated Latin too. If everyone could just very quickly type in what they think this might be, what do you think you're looking at? You've got a teacher, and the teacher's telling the children, now write this in English. So if this is a teaching methodology, a language teaching methodology, what would this be? Well, hey. The real classical method, indeed, was grammar translation. There was a lot of focus on grammar rules, which was seen as the basis of translation. Conjugations with long, elaborate explanations of the thanks, Tyson. The intricacies of how language works, and vocabulary was often presented in long lists that people had to memorize, isolated words that had, that did not have a context, and lots of written exercises. This at that time was thought to promote intellectuality through mental gymnastics. Now, what do I mean by mental gymnastics? Right. I had a student who was a physicist, and he studied Greek and Latin back at school, and he swears by it. He says that it was the best thing he ever did as a physicist. It was that very mental gymnastics that he was doing through memorizing vocabulary and lists and trying to conjugate verbs, put them in verb tables that trained his analytical abilities, his categorization abilities. And these so-called mental gymnastics that was happening up here facilitated him learning the sciences and physics. However, we're language teachers trying to help our students communicate in the language. And unfortunately, with grammar translation, there wasn't a lot of communicating happening. Yes, a lot of drilling and memorizing by heart, Halima. This was often considered a theoryless method amongst all the methodologies that we practiced. This was the one that was considered to be theoryless and apparently doesn't have any pedagogic justifications whatsoever. Today, we still see grammar translation in lots of books. It's still a popular method today. This is an example. I saw this in a Korean grammar translation book, and I absolutely love it. I For a while, I thought to myself, this is really contrived. No one would really say I'm flying on a carpet, you're flying on a carpet. I mean, if you really push it, you could easily say, hey, look, if I took my kids to watch Aladdin, maybe I might say, hey, look, Princess Jasmine's flying on the carpet, etc. Having said that, I think it's safe to say that this doesn't have a lot of have a high surrender value. It's not the most useful thing, and this is a very typical thing in a grammar translation book. Sentences that were contrived, random, and absolutely decontextualized. Having said that, I love translation. I'm learning German at the moment, and translation from English to German really, really is all I can do. Um, did you really fly into the virtual room on the carpet? All right, well, okay. Yeah, see, if you really push something, you can always find a use of any sentence in the world, isn't it? I'm learning German at the moment, and I'm finding it really difficult as a pure beginner. And I don't know where to start. But thank God for cognates. Knowing that find is finden in German, it suddenly increases my vocabulary by tons. And that really helps me. At the end of the day, translation is going to happen in the students' heads anyway. It's the most efficient way of clarifying meaning. And as shown by Andrew Sampson in his research, students do it all the time because they know it's incredibly efficient. You can stop them from speaking L1 in the classroom, but they're going to translate in their heads anyway. In my learning of German, making use of cognates, and someone, I think Victor said, comparing L1 and L2, using even with grammar or vocabulary, looking at how the first language does it and looking at how the second language does it, tends to help me a lot in my learning of German. It's extremely good if you are the systematic sort. If you're the kind of person who likes equations, like my physicist student, you're the kind of person who likes tables, who likes patterns, and who likes to have time to think and not to be forced to communicate. I suppose that could be a really good method for you. And a lot of people claim that in the communicative classroom, sometimes there's not enough focus on form and accuracy, and translation does provide for that focus. But like most academics, people tend to swing from one end of the spectrum to the other. At one time, translation was all there was. And then, suddenly, they've decided, no, we really don't like grammar translation. It's boring and it doesn't really do very much. And you know what? No one can communicate in those languages after translating, reams of texts. So the practitioners and the academics swung in the other direction and decided that they didn't want any more translation in the language classroom. This started to happen. Again, as Tyson said, stealth pair work. Could you all type what you think this might be? What method of teaching might this be? Oh, TPR, really? Well, in the 1940s, all the way through to the 1960s, the army or the military was known to drill their soldiers because languages needed to be learned and they needed to be learned quickly. We wanted to produce identical abilities in all the soldiers. We wanted uniformity. So as a language teaching system was created, as such a language system was created because so that learners can all be treated as an entity that would learn the same thing, a little bit like robots, perhaps. This is indeed it's the audiolingual method, or in Europe more known as the direct method. Yeah, I get this into this debate with people very often as to the difference between the audiolingual method and the direct method. The audiolingual method was much more common in the US and often involved laboratories. The direct method is what I'm much more familiar with. It came up in Europe. It was very popular from the 1940s all the way through to the 1960s. I used to work for a school that practiced the direct method, and that was not too long ago. I did not teach in the 1940s. This was in the classroom. This was in every classroom of the school that I taught in. Do not think, just repeat, repeat, repeat. We teach the learners the same things. We drill them the same things. We ask them not to think, but to just repeat the things we drill. And we expect them to learn them. And when they don't learn what we teach, we say things like, oh, but I thought I taught you that yesterday. And then learners start to feel bad when they don't get it. And they think that just simply by repeating and drilling, they're going to get it. We perpetuate this belief that learning is linear. That if you drill it enough, if you learn it and study hard enough, you're going to get it. They go out there, they try to communicate, they try to speak, and they realize that they just can't use the grammar that's just been taught. They feel dejected, they feel that they are perhaps even stupid. More importantly, the direct method or the audiolingual method seemed to focus very much, just like grammar translation, on grammar and long, long lists of lexes. There was hardly any focus on pragmatics and discourse, and no actual natural language usage. Now, you're sitting there thinking, I'm not really sure what she's talking about right now. What is the direct method? I have a video of what I used to do in the classroom. If you bear with me for a moment. Can you see what I'm seeing? All right, here we go. Right, this is not me teaching, thank God, but this is exactly what I used to do, and this is a direct method.
Did you walk to school yesterday? Did you walk to school yesterday? Yes. Walked to school yesterday. Good, well done. Okay, did you work last month? Did you work last month? Yes.
Yes, I walked last
Not walk, I worked.
I walked
Not
last month.
worked
Last
month. Good, not month.
month.
Good, okay. Did you watch television last week? Did you watch television last week? Yes, no?
Yes, I watched television last
Week. Good, well done. Okay. When did last season end? When did last season end? The last season?
The last season.
Not the last. Not the last. Last season.
Ended
On the
on the 21st of December.
of December. Okay. How long did last season last? How long did last season last? Last season.
Last season
Lasted
lasted
for
3 months.
for 3 months. Okay. Good. Right. Can you see any trees from where you're sitting? Can you see any trees from where you're sitting? No.
No, I can't see any trees from the place where
No.
from the
From where?
from where
I'm sitting. Yeah. On the place.
And that is the direct method. Hold on a minute. Can you see me? Can you still see me? Brilliant. I'm really sorry we have to do this, but the Adobe Connect doesn't do video, so I really have to stop sharing my document and start sharing the video from my desktop, so you could see my desktop. And so this is what it's all about. Do not think, just repeat, repeat, repeat. Well, yeah, they are really a bit like parrots. The method is basically based on the fact that the teacher repeats every question twice. Can you see any trees from where you're sitting? Can you see any trees from where you're sitting? The students are not supposed to think of the answer. The teacher feeds them the answer as well as the question. The student repeats the answer after the teacher. And the belief is that if the student repeats the answer enough times, they will eventually be able to do it without the teacher saying the answer right next to them. Yeah, Mar, it could be quite stressful, but some say it's very, very safe, that there's no thinking involved, and it just requires the student to just repeat what the teacher's saying. And in that sense, yeah, Bart Simpson chalkboard style, absolutely. In my direct method coursebook, when I was using it, however, again, what we saw very much similar to I'm flying on the carpet, she's flying on the carpet, were questions like this one. And this one. Have you 2 ears? We tried to ask the writers of the coursebook to basically change it to do you have 2 ears? Not like it makes a big difference. But, considering that in modern English, we would say, have you got 2 ears? The answer was absolutely not. That's wrong English. You have to say, have you 2 ears? And by the way, we do not have 5 fingers. We have 4 fingers and 1 thumb. This is absolutely true. I'm not making this up. In order to teach grammar, the second conditional, we had to repeat this sentence twice. If you fell from the top of a very high building, would you die? If you fell from the top of a very high building, would you die? Of course, the answer would be, if I fell from the top of a very high building, I would die. Now, if the student gave the answer yes to this question, the teacher would then say, no, you're not supposed to give short answers. You're supposed to repeat the entire sentence. If I fell from the top of a very high building, I'd die. Because the whole idea of the direct method is about repeating full sentences. Here's an example of teaching advanced students the direct method and teaching lexis to students. The lexis here clearly being poison and being shot. This upset quite a lot of people in my class. My Colombian students were not happy being asked this question. What is the direct method based on? It looks pretty mad, and all of you are kind of saying, yeah, it's really, really stressful. Skinner, as you can see, the American flag right above him, Skinner talked a lot about behaviorism and how languages were learned through repeating and through a stimulus response system, basically, through behavioral conditioning. A version of behaviorism, or a way of looking at behaviorism, is through the famous story of Pavlov's dogs. So basically, Pavlov decided that every time his dogs were to have lunch, he would ring a bell. And lunchtime, he would ring a bell. The next day at lunchtime, he rang a bell. And soon enough, the dogs began to associate lunchtime food with the bell. So the next time food was not being served, the bell was rung, the dogs assumed that the food was being served, the dogs started to salivate, therefore associating the bell with food. Similarly, in language teaching, if your student says, I am agree, if you hit them on the head enough times and they say, I'm agree again, you hit them on the head, or electrocute your students for that matter, they might learn that I am agree equals wrong behavior. Or if they say I agree, reward them with a piece of chocolate, they might understand that I agree is rewarded with right behavior, and therefore language learning occurs. Fantastic, isn't it? Now, we are all thinking, gosh, this sounds horrible. Yeah, Mike, do you ring a bell when your students do their homework? I love the direct method because repetition is important. Now, I know it sounds boring. People say it's like a parrot, but it does help memorization. You can't deny that repetition is part of language learning, and it helps us to remember lexis, which is a huge part of it. I think that somehow the direct method is the early lexical approach. We weren't taught poisoned or shot. We were taught being poisoned and being shot. We were taught language in sentences and never individually on their own. Or rather, we were teaching language as chunks, as collocations. So perhaps it is the original lexical approach. It trains our motor skills to respond. It trains us to be automatic, very much like the way we would learn to play the piano or any musical instrument. Some people say it's really stressful. I've noticed that students from certain cultures, especially cultures where the education system seems to stress writing and a lot of writing and reading of languages and very little speaking. They come to me, they come to the UK, for example, where I'm based, and they say, look, I really want to learn to speak. Sitting them down and saying in pairs, tell your partner about the causes of global warming doesn't quite cut it. Students from cultures like that might find it really intimidating to suddenly be made to speak in a language and offer opinions in a language that they're not used to communicating in a spoken way in. This kind of a method creates a really safe environment and allows students to just repeat without thinking and therefore forces them to speak. Yeah, it's a little boring, I admit. It focuses a lot on pronunciation, though. You saw the teacher correcting the students' pronunciation quite a lot. There was a lot of focus on pronunciation. And just for argument's sake, you could say that the communicative approach does kind of favor students who are more extroverted, students who have something to say, and shy students often get neglected in a communicative classroom. This method, however, considering that it was a method used for teaching soldiers and for creating people to be equal, does not favor extroverted students over shy students. Everyone's equal, everyone's the same. Yeah, Willie, I do agree with you. Thinking is good in language learning, from what we know today, and I'll come to that, I promise you. But according to the direct method and according to the theories of behaviorism, it's all about, stimulus response. Back to the, my mother hits me in the head enough times and I'll do the right thing. And that was the theory behind it. We know a lot more now, clearly. Now, this guy, just like Willie, didn't agree. He created, or he staged, a massive public debate with Skinner, saying that clearly behaviorism and imitation stimulus response is not the only thing that causes language learning. Clearly not, he said. Who's this person? Mark, you're absolutely right. This is Chomsky. Chomsky and the lad, or Chomsky and the language acquisition device. Chomsky basically said that language learning was too complex a procedure, and we clearly have an innate disposition to learning language structures. In 1959, Chomsky watched children learn languages, and he saw them create sentences that they clearly haven't imitated. Now, according to Skinner, language learning was all about parroting, imitating what mummy and daddy says. But Chomsky noticed that children were saying sentences like, "Mummy, mummy, biscuit eat," and "Mummy, go park yesterday," or "Mummy goed to the park yesterday." Now, clearly, mummy hasn't said goed as the past tense of go. So what's happening there is the child is trying things out. The child, like Willie said, is thinking through the rules that they're acquiring and experimenting with it. The child has realized that adding ed to a verb creates a past tense. He's experimenting with all the verbs, and now he says, "Mummy goed to the park yesterday." There's clearly a lot more than imitation at work here. There is a lot of brain work happening, and there's a lot of thinking happening. Yes, Antonia and Barbara, he definitely talked a lot about universal grammar as well. The way, perhaps, since language learning is such a complicated and complex process, and for children to acquire such a complex process, there must be some kind of language acquisition device in our brains and some kind of universal grammar that all children of all first languages all over the world had. And flicking the right switch, the English switch or the Japanese switch, enables them to acquire the grammars of different languages. However, we must remember that Chomsky is a theoretician. He is not a practitioner. But his focus on transformational grammar led us to new ways of thinking and focusing on grammar. And this is what he's given us. Now, I'm sure this looks really, really familiar to most of us. The categorization of and these tables of subject, verb, object, verbal, and breaking it further down from verb phrase to auxiliary verb and present participle, etc. Such a way of analyzing grammar still exists today, not only in the teaching of English language, but this has gone forth and spread itself into the teaching of modern languages like Japanese and Italian as well. Now, in the attempt to cover the present continuous, you still see sentences like, "I'm dropping the pen on the floor and the mouse is eating biscuits under the chair." I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever said the mouse is eating biscuits under the chair. Again, just like I'm flying on the carpet, she's flying the carpet, or if you fell from the top of a very high building, would you die? Have you two ears? We are still stuck in this situation where sentences are randomly thrown out just to show a particular grammar point, just to demonstrate the present continuous. I've got the mouse is eating biscuits under the chair, she's flying on the carpet. Sentences are extremely contrived, and really meaning is really not the issue here. I don't care about meaning whatsoever. I just care about form. Form over meaning anytime was the headline of the day. Meanwhile, in the 1970s, a range of humanistic approaches led to designer methods of teaching. Let's have a look at the first one. Now, here's a clue. If you know what the first humanistic designer approach might be, please feel free to type away. Yeah, Tyson, nowadays we've got lots of examples of form-focused activities that are actually also communicative, and I suppose It's again not about being too extreme and trying to combine all the different bits together. Um, Music, Baroque music, absolutely. Baroque music, anyone? Let's try this picture. Yes, Sue, yes. It's Suggestopedia indeed. In 1979, Georgy Lozanoff believed that the human brain could process large amounts of materials given the right conditions for learning. And to create these right conditions, Baroque music was key to this, was central to this. He believed that Baroque music enabled the brain to kind of adopt a relaxed, suggestible state, and therefore the term suggestopedia, so that they are able to absorb language almost through osmosis. What you see in this picture are not clouds, but two people lying in very, very comfortable sofas that the school has very kindly provided. The classroom was no longer seen. I'll tell you in a moment, Sue, why they've changed its name. But Sue's basically saying that they are no longer called Suggestopedia, but they are now called de-Suggestopedia. The classroom was basically not seen as a place for desks and chairs and, really boring clinical furniture, but comfortable chairs, music, dim lighting, and a teacher who is really, really relaxed. Now, how does Suggestopedia work? These are the steps of a Suggestopedia lesson, just to give you an idea. All right. Now, first of all, there was the pre-teaching state, where students were given texts. These texts could be articles, theatre scripts, poems, fictional stories. While the students hold the text in their hands, they go through a concert reading stage where the teacher reads the text in an exaggerated manner, like I'm doing now, with Baroque music playing in the background. With the exaggerated pronunciation and the music and the comfortable chairs, the students were meant to absorb the texts. After the text, there's a decoding session where the students then decode the grammar and the structures in the text with the teacher. And then, after which, they have some kind of controlled practice activities. So what they would call activation. Moving activities where students get to match words together, play with the structures they've seen in the text. So controlled practice activities to enable them to use the structures they saw in the text better. And finally, the lesson would end with what they call a relaxation concert. This time, with a different kind of Baroque music in the background, students again lying on the sofas, and the teacher reading the text once more, but not in an exaggerated fashion, but in a natural way. This is meant to encourage absorption of the language. Now, this seems to support people like Gardner and Lambert in 1972, who had theories of how personality factors, such as high self-esteem, lowered inhibitions, not having anxiety in the classroom, and keeping this anxiety to the minimum can help language learning, which makes total sense. If students are relaxed, they would learn languages very, very well. And there's one other person who agreed with this. Here we go. He talked about lowering those affective filters. Now, who is he? Yes, Mark, well done. It is Krashen, indeed. And one of Krashen's many hypotheses, yes, it is Stephen. I love the way you say Stephen. Stephen Krashen talked about how we all have affective filters, and if these affective filters are high, we are guarded. It's like a fortress we build around us, and we are unable to learn because we're so guarded and so worried about our image. And if we are able to lower these affective filters, make our students feel comfortable, relaxed, then they're much more able to absorb the language. However, there was one big issue with Suggestopedia and these theories, and that is that it seems to equate memorization to language acquisition. It seems to believe that language can be learned just by absorbing vocabulary and grammar. It seems to assume that, just like the direct method, that just by memorizing, by repeating and remembering lexis and grammar, that means we have learned some language. But we know today that memorization is important, but it's not the be-all and end-all of language learning. It's the actual interactions, learning to communicate, experimenting with words and structures, and negotiating meaning that leads to language acquisition. What I mean is this. When students are in class talking to their partners or to the teacher and trying to get a message across, trying to say, you know, I can't say this in English. This is really difficult. Oh, let me try it this way. No, that's not right. Let me try it that way. No, that's not right either. Oh, I really don't know how to say it. And really struggling to say what they really need to say. That is language acquisition happening right in front of you. That is second language acquisition and second language learning. And just reducing language learning to memorization seems to ignore the fact that this process, this mental process of struggling, is important to language acquisition. However, I still love Suggestopedia, even after they renamed it the Suggestopedia. Now, before I go on to why I love Suggestopedia, perhaps I'd just like to answer Sue's question about why they renamed it. Apparently, Georgy Lozanov, the founder of Suggestopedia, was, if I'm not wrong, don't quote me on it, was arrested, and his followers decided to create a new branch of Suggestopedia that was slightly different, but along the lines of Suggestopedia. It was believed that only Georgy Lozanov actually knew how to do Suggestopedia right and could actually create a real effect in students. So his followers created sort of a branch of Suggestopedia and so renamed it the Suggestopedia. That's as far as I know. So I hope that explains that to you, Sue. This is why I love Suggestopedia, and they're the only method that allows sofas in the classroom. The importance of relaxation, reminding us that it is important to be relaxed, and that it's important for us to create a safe environment for students. Not to tell our students off when they forget their homework, not to hit them in the head, but to just make them feel that mistakes are okay to make and it's all right. We're just going to relax and have fun together. It gives emotional meanings to words. It helps us to realize that words and sentences like she's flying on the carpet and the mouse is eating a biscuit under the chair are not just words to exemplify a grammar point. Words have meaning and words have emotions. We say things like, oh my, and what a pity, and what's that got to do with me? We say these sentences with emotions, and those emotions need to be acted out by students. And how do we get them to act it out? By offering a chance for role play in the classroom. Now, Suggestopedia lessons often had students taking on new identities. So, for example, Mike Hogan from Ireland is no longer Mike Hogan from Ireland. He's now Tyson from Canada. Halima from Uzbekistan is now Sue. And etc. And Chia from London is now Paul from Spain. You're given different identities, and the belief is that with different identities, we're able to shed our embarrassment, our shyer selves, and to take on identities and abilities to use language like we've never done before. So if my student Aygul from Kazakhstan is suddenly Catherine from Ireland, then she's able to pretend that she is Irish and feel less inhibition in speaking English, because in the world of Catherine from Ireland, English is her first language. So allowing this kind of play with language and play with identity allows students to stop being shy and reduce the affective filters. It tried very hard to cater to different learner styles. Not just the learner style that involved lying on sofas and being lazy, but there were styles like kinesthetic learning styles and audio and visual learning styles that were catered to in a Suggestopedia lesson. Now, in 1977, this happened. And this is not Suggestopedia. This is a different designer approach to learning. Why could this be? Have a look. Yes. It is total physical response, absolutely. TPR, or total physical response. In 1977, Dr. Tom Asher said that memory was increased. It was stimulated through the association with physical motor activities. A lot of TPR was based on extrapolations of first language acquisition. Now, what I mean is this. When children learn languages, they don't start speaking at the same time as they start listening. They spend about a year or so listening to their parents talk to them before they utter their first words. It was believed that children had a long period of time learning receptive skills before productive skills, and that they accompanied their language learning with physical responses. When they watched their parents speak to them, their parents often accompanied language with physical gestures and action. And this apparently is very effective, especially at beginner levels. So TPR methodologies allowed students to not say very much in the lesson, but receive what the student or listen to what the teacher is saying and act accordingly. Now, I have a video. Thanks to Sandy. Sandy's here. Thanks, Sandy, for this video. I will show you a version of. It's not exactly TPR, but it's what TPR could be like. Now, this is a very serious video, so do watch this carefully.
Okay, hold on. Where does it hurt?
My stomach. ちゃんと痛いけど痛い。
救急車を呼んでもらったからといって安心はできません。しっかりと自分の状態を相手に伝えましょう。
I have a bad case of diarrhea.
私はひどい下痢です。
I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea.
I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. 肩に手を乗せ、I have クロスして、a bad case お腹をさすって、of diarrhea.
Is it funnier the second time, Paul? There's a whole range of, this is for real, by the way, this is not a joke. There's a whole series of these. Sandy, you can tell them. There's a whole series of them on YouTube that you can actually watch. It includes things like I was robbed by two men, or rather, I was robbed by two men, and spare me my life, and I had a bad case of diarrhea, etc., etc. Do check it out on YouTube. It is absolutely hilarious. Yes, it is pretty old, Mikako. It is a video. It's a very old video. I'm not suggesting that everyone in Japan does this. Absolutely not. But there is a school of thought behind this video, which is that physical actions accompany sentences, and if we can help students memorize actions, rather language phrases and vocabulary by giving them accompanying actions, then that might train their automaticity, and which is very much the basis of TPR and total physical response. But I do love TPR. Have you ever done Simon Says in the classroom? Halima, it wasn't a Chinese method. Unfortunately, TPR is very, very much a very European method. That was not Chinese, by the way. That was Japanese. Yes, Simon Says in the classroom works really effectively if you're teaching bodily functions like sneeze and cough and scratch. Simon Says works perfectly. Teaching nose and eyes by getting students to sing heads and shoulders, knees and toes. Absolutely TPR. So I do love TPR. And why do I love TPR? It's great for teaching imperatives. What is Simon Says if not teaching imperatives? It's great for teaching action verbs. Swedish TPR, brilliant, Sandy. It's great because it uses drama, it uses acting and makes it fun. It's fun, but I'm not quite sure who it's fun for, whether it's more fun for the people watching, like the teacher, or the students themselves. It definitely suits kinesthetic learners, and TPR came up at a time when we were really into this learning styles thing, we started to realize that there were different learning styles. Some people were more visual, some learners were more kinesthetic, some learners were more audio, and that to be able to cater to different types of learners really was TPR's strong point. It creates a stress-free atmosphere. I mean, seriously, can you be stressed if you were dancing to "I've Got a Bad Case of Diarrhea"? Because it's based on first language acquisition processes, it allows students to just do the actions. Like in Simon Says, the students are not really producing. The teacher's saying, scratch. Simon Says, scratch your head. The students listens and then scratches their heads. They receive, they listen, and they do the action. They are under no stress at all to produce sentences. They just listen and do the action. A very different approach to TPR was this one. What approach might this be? Halima, it's interesting. You know, there was a time when I was teaching where I used to say, oh, you know, no one could ever learn a language through grammar translation, and no one could ever learn a language through the direct method. And I've seen and met, maybe you could say they're exceptions, but I've seen and met students and learners who speak amazingly well. And when you ask them, well, you know, how did you learn English? They go, oh, yeah, grammar translation. Oh, yeah, the direct method. So I'm not really careful of knocking methods because, you know, as I said at the beginning of this talk, I went through this with how we applying theories wrongly. What are we doing wrong in the classroom? And I started to think about it, and I thought about these students who, you know, they managed to become expert users of English through a grammar translation method. So in that sense, I suppose every method does have its pros and cons, and perhaps it suits some people more than others, and perhaps it's all about the motivation of the learner. Yes, indeed. A lot of people are saying silent way. Yes, indeed, silent way it is. This is my friend, the teacher who mimes. Can you see the green arrow? All right, so this is the miming teacher who remains silent. Absolutely, really, shh. The teacher remains silent throughout the lesson. And over here, you have the pronunciation charts. There are lots of different pronunciation charts, and that's a weird little description of Cuisenaire rods. Now, what are Cuisenaire rods? These are Cuisenaire rods that you've just seen early on. These are Cuisenaire rods. And these Cuisenaire rods were originally invented for teaching mathematics, like 1 + 1 = 2. However, these rods are now used to create scenarios, to show sentence structures, to show sentence stress even. But all throughout the entire thing, the teacher remains silent. Now, in the 1970s, this method was created by Caleb Cattaneo. It was considered a problem-solving and discovery learning approach to language learning. Now, unlike what we saw earlier with total physical response, which believed that language learning was very much like first language acquisition, that second language acquisition was like children learning languages. This method, in the silent way, Caleb Cattaneo says, no, second language acquisition is not like first language acquisition. As adults, when we're learning a second language, it's an intellectual process. We already have a language, so the second language becomes a cognitive process. The learner discovers, the learner creates, rather than simply just remembers and repeats. The learner does not need to listen for a year before producing language, because the learner already is able to produce language is in his first language. Now, this was the basis of the theories behind, the theories that underpin the silent way. The teacher remains quiet, and the learners tries to figure out what the teacher's trying to tell them. The learners do the task together by talking to each other, by solving problems, by solving tasks. The learners talk, the teacher doesn't. Now, the criticism is that, as you can imagine, Cuisenaire rods in every single lesson can get very boring. And as teachers too distant, it's really hard to encourage a communicative atmosphere. Having said that, I like the silent way, and this is why. It's student-centered. It promotes, for the first time, it promotes cross-classroom interaction. It's not just about interaction with the teacher and the student, it's interaction among students themselves while the teacher remains silent. It focuses on learner autonomy. Students have to work things out for themselves. And the teacher, for the first time, is not the center of the classroom. The teacher is merely the stimulator, the facilitator. The silent way reminds us of this Chinese proverb: tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand. And the silent way tries to involve students more than teachers. Now, in 1972, this happened. What could this be? Absolutely, community language learning, fantastic. Now, Charles Curran was inspired by Carl Rogers' view of education, that a class is not a class. A class is a group of people, and every group is in need of therapy and counseling. Absolutely. Students need a direction, and in this case, the direction is in the form of a teacher going around a circle and encouraging students to whisper into their ear what they want to say. So, for example, you might have a group of students sitting in a circle, and a conversation begins. Now, I want to say, hi, how are you? My name is Stan, and I don't have any vice, like in the picture. I put my hand up, the teacher comes to me, I whisper the sentence in my teacher's ear in my own first language. The teacher then translates it into English for me, and I will then try and repeat what the teacher said in English a few times until I'm confident with it. I then perhaps record the sentence in English onto a little tape recorder. Now, the person beside Stan, in the picture, but maybe the person beside me might decide that she has a response to what I'm saying. She might want to say, hi, my name is Betty, and I don't have any vice either. She thus puts up a hand, the teacher comes over to her, she whispers it in her first language, the teacher translates it, etc. And the process creates a conversation. A lot of people complain that the teacher is not directing the process, that there is no syllabus involved, that it's a wishy-washy, long, drawn-out process that can make a conversation really painful and slow. Just perhaps listening to me describe it kind of put some of you to sleep already. It depends a lot on the translation expertise of the teacher, or what a CLL practitioner might call the counselor, not the teacher, but the counselor. And how we know that teaching English is not the same as translating. Translation expertise is a whole different area altogether, and translation is an intricate and complicated process. And this is something that CLR did not consider. However, there are reasons why I love community language learning. And for the first time, learners are not just students. They are members of a community. They collaborate and they learn together. So the syllabus, very much like a dogma lesson, is student-led. The teacher doesn't tell them what they are covering today. The teacher doesn't tell them which grammar points are to emerge according to the teacher. What emerges, emerges. Students are not forced to participate. And unlike most other designer methods at that time, it was not only about lexis and grammar, it was about discourse and communicative competence. Using L1 meant that students felt more comfortable and safe, and meaning was dealt with easily, not just form. And today, we have this. We've come to the communicative language learning process. Now, where does communicative language learning come from? Now, we've got Vygotsky over here, and he's looking at these two guys in the 1920s in Russia, and he's thinking, there seems to be some kind of zone at work here. What shall I call it? What is this zone? Anyone? ZPD indeed, zone of proximal development. What is the zone of proximal development? Vygotsky noticed that a lot of schools were testing students according to their abilities of what they are able to do. However, when students are put together in pairs or in groups and collaborate, their abilities were much more than they were tested to be. So a student on his own could be able to do this, but with his partner when collaborating is able to do this. And this is the zone of proximal development. This is the potential a person can achieve if given the chance to collaborate. Now, what does this mean to our language classrooms? Now, Krashen talks about the same thing in his theories of comprehensible input, or also known as I+1. If the student's able to do this much and we are able to give that student the +1, not the +10, but just the +1, language with a bit of new language involved, the student should be able to understand and improve. This kind of scaffolding is really important in communicative language learning today. Having said that, we often seem to interpret scaffolding to be done for grammatical structures than for meaning. Now, I find this really quite strange because when we talk about scaffolding, we often talk about covering the present simple before we cover the past simple, then we cover the present continuous, which I find rather odd because the +1 in a conversation, if I'm speaking in a foreign language and there was lots of unknown vocabulary, +10 of unknown vocabulary, I would be really intimidated. But if there were some unknown grammatical structures, it's not going to be as intimidating or affect my comprehension as much as if there was a lot of unknown lexes. Now, this is what we end up doing, trying to scaffold students and trying to allow sort of the +1 of grammatical structures rather than vocabulary. We present a grammatical structure, and in a very linear fashion, we allow controlled practice, and then we allow freer practice, and we expect them to produce a language. Now, this is really odd because we assume that students are creating a structure in their minds first. They're saying, okay, I need to use the first conditional. Right, what can I say in the first conditional? And then the thought process comes in, and they think, right, let's make a sentence in the first conditional. If I were a horse, I would run really quickly. And then the speech comes in. But in real life, we don't go around thinking, I need to make a sentence in the first conditional. The thought comes first. In real life, we think, and then we speak. And then once the speech is formulated, either in our heads or out there, we self-correct. This thought process could be us thinking in our first language and then translating into L2 in speech, or it could be a thought process in the L2 through an inner competence, because we are fluent L2 speakers, so we think in the L2, we speak, and then we correct what we've said. Either way, thought comes first, not structure. Have you ever had controlled practices where you tell students, like, make a sentence with should have plus past participle? Students come back with things like, I should have gone to bed earlier. And you say, oh, so did you go to bed really late last night? And they say, no, teacher, I was only making a sentence. And that's the problem with having structures come first. Students make sentences because they have to, not because that's what they really mean, not because that's what they really want to express. So, course books, again and again, we see examples of course books starting with structures, not starting with thought processes, but starting with structures. Right, here's a grammar syllabus. I need to cover the second conditional in the course book. How shall I do it? Well, let's have the topic of millionaires. If I were a millionaire, I would buy Mike Hogan a Ferrari. Or, let's see, we need to cover future forms. What topic shall we get the students to talk about? Brilliant, let's talk about the future. Why not? Let's talk about robots and flying cars and futuristic cities. Or if you want to talk about countable, uncountable nouns, hey, why not? Let's talk about food or materials. A glass, a chicken, some chicken. It's got to be food. Hey, the present continuous again. We've got she's having a shower, she's cooking, he's repairing a car, and whoa, she's walking. Very useful sentence. What I'm trying to say here is book after book, even in the communicative approach, what we see is a grammar syllabus scaffolded. So we've got the present continuous, then we've got the past continuous, we've got the present perfect, then we've got the past perfect. A scaffolding of a grammar syllabus with topics squeezed in to fit the grammar that we're trying to teach. Now, let's have a look at this course book. First you have the verb to be, there is, there are, then you've got the have gots, this present simple, question forms, etc. A very nicely scaffolded grammar approach to things, a grammar syllabus with the topics sort of, there because we are in the communicative approach of teaching and we really need to pay some lip service to it. This happens throughout all the course books I've seen, or at least most of the course books I've seen. A example of here we have another example of it. We've got the present simple, the past simple, etc., etc. Now, don't misunderstand me. People who know me know I love grammar. I really do love grammar, and I'm a really systematic person. I like my tables. I like my equations. I'm a systematic learner. Learners expect grammar. Teachers expect grammar, and I do not blame the course book writers because they have to cater to learners and students' expectations and teachers' expectations too. Rules gives us a feeling that is learnable. it provides that feeling that there is scaffolding, that the past simple should come after the present simple, and I feel like I'm making progress. However, we must not forget that language learning is all about negotiation of meaning. I'll give you a minute to read this. No, we're not going to talk about systemic functional grammar, Mike. Negotiation of meaning is about what we talked about, struggling. Now, the learner on the left is struggling to say my father is really ill, but he's finding different ways of having a go and trying to express himself. And that, as we said earlier, is language learning, happening right before your eyes. Activities involving real tasks where learners are really, the boy here is really trying to express that his father is ill. It is not about language, it's not about the lexis. He just needs to get that message across. I recently had a student from Germany, and she was the shyest student. Teachers could not get a word out of her. I asked her to tell me all about East Germany, where she was from, because I didn't know much about the history of East Germany. And she spent the entire hour telling me how difficult it was to talk about the history of Germany in English, because she was sort of a mid-intermediate level speaker. But she did. She was so excited about telling me the stories and letting me know what she knew that it wasn't about lexis or grammar anymore. It was about the real outcome of letting me know. So she negotiated meaning. She tried different ways of paraphrasing and trying to get her meaning across, and it was just wonderful to watch. And therefore, we have task-based learning. Now, here's a task, a typical task-based learning task. You're organizing a dinner party. Which historical figure would you invite to the party? Now, some say, oh gosh, that's not a task that I would normally do in real life, but it creates negotiation of meaning. Having said that, I would like to alert you to a really disturbing story I heard. I had some students who had teachers who were not from my school, who had teachers from the native countries who used a task-based learning book and had this task. When I asked them, when I probed them further, they said that the teachers spent 2 hours or so on the pre-task, which was the lexis practice, the grammar practice, that was to prepare them for the task. And when I said, how much time were you given for this task? The student said, 2 to 3 minutes. And that worries me, because to me, we can't possibly label ourselves task-based learning teachers and do that. Now, here are other tasks that I've seen which I think is worth thinking about. Are these tasks that we want our students to be doing? Is there any value in getting them to design a postage stamp? Is there any negotiation of meaning involved? Do students ever need to write a movie review or go to Oxford? Or this, would you ever talk about what makes you embarrassed or what makes you feel depressed in a task? Or this, thanks, Victor. But I love TBL, and here's why. It focuses on cognitive processing. It recognizes that problem solving is part of language learning. The task might be unrealistic, as we said, but language is still meaningful. It focuses on communicative competence and discourse. It promotes negotiation of meaning, and it doesn't follow a linear grammatical syllabus, which is why it's so hard to write a task-based learning coursebook. It works on emergent language and lets students say what they know how to say. Thought comes first, not structure. They say what they want to say, and then we correct them. It encourages output, and then it leads students to notice what they're not doing or what they're not doing correctly. So, what do we know about second language learning? These are the things we do know. We know that negotiation of meaning is important. We also know that feedback on language output is important. Otherwise, it just descends into a chat in the pub. Teachers need to give feedback on language output. There was importance of contextualization and not contrived sentences. We should try and allow students to come into contact with frequently used language and ensure that tasks are motivating and meaningful. Now, I'm going to skip past these things, but I think the main message of today for me is to remember not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I love grammar translation and the direct method and suggestopedia and TPR and the silent way and communicative language learning and grammar and task-based learning. Because at the end of the day, it's about cherry picking. Not the cherry picker that you see here, but perhaps this is sexy cherry picker you see in front of you, who is using different methods judiciously, picking because she knows the theories behind each method and knows when to pick them and how to suit the learners that she's teaching. Language learning is not a linear process, so we mustn't fool ourselves or our learners to believe it is. This is language learning. It's chaotic. It's mad. I feel like I'm doing a pichakucha at the moment. So let's stop paying lip service to applied linguistics. Let's stop saying we know the theories, we're applying the theories, we're doing communicative language learning, when actually, in fact, we're only following a grammar syllabus. Now, if you listen to this and think, oh, I didn't know about these methods, or maybe you think I knew about these methods and I forgot them already, then I think you need to ask yourself these very important questions. Are we saying we're doing TBL, but really are just spending 2 hours on grammar clarification and 3 minutes on the task? Are we saying that we subscribe to the communicative approach and are really not allowing sufficient time for the negotiation of meaning to happen? Are we saying that we love lexical syllabus, but we actually secretly flip to content pages and look for the grammatical syllabus immediately? Are we saying that we're prepared to deal with learner output and learner-led syllabuses when actually we're more worried about the backup plan, just in case it doesn't work? It's important, I think, to reflect and ask ourselves, why are we doing this activity? Can I stop you at any point during your lesson and say, why are you doing pair work? Why have you put them in a running dictation? Are you able to justify every stage of your lesson? And if not, why not? Ask yourself why things are not working when they're not working. Or if they're working, why are they working? Technology is abundant these days. Students don't need the teachers anymore. Not in the sense that they used to, in the way they used to. Students don't need teachers to tell them about grammar because they have apps to do that. They have Wikipedia to do that. Students don't need teachers to tell them about lexes. They've got online dictionaries. Students have smartphones and corpuses online. We need to know much more than just language. We need to know how learners learn a language. We need to be better, mainly because our students